You heard of the 6 degrees of separation, the idea that everyone on the planet is linked in some way, from one person's connection to another and their connections and so on and so on. Well, did you know that years before planes were sent into the Twin Towers on 9/11, one of Osama Bin Laden's brothers died in an ultralight plane crash right here in Schertz?
And so that might make you wonder, why was a Bin Laden here? Well, it was nothing sinister. In fact, it was the opposite. It was about friendship and family. And tonight, I have a surprising story of a World War II veteran who lived through so much in war, and then his life took a big turn, and that led to the brush with infamy.
Yeah, we can take the cards out.
Cards with friends. They meet every week to exercise their minds.
Thank you.
Minds rich with history.
No spades.
And this man's been dealt quite a hand in life.
Yeah.
Because he'd like to keep a low profile, we'll just call him Ralph. He decided to be a pilot at the age of 9, graduated from high school at 15. In World War II, he was a radar bombardier, navigator, dropping incendiary bombs in the famous Tokyo fire raids. Raids that could generate such a fiery atmosphere they would push back up at some of the planes.
We were nose down like this, airspeed at red line, throttles almost in idle, and still going up.
Aircraft began their ceaseless drive.
Then he was a pilot in the Berlin airlift, a crucial lifeline to a blockaded city.
And we flew, if the weather was VFR, we flew 3-minute intervals, an airplane takeoff every 3 minutes.
He retired from the Air Force in the 1960s, and that is when he drew a real wild card.
And that's when the article came out in the paper, said that TWA was looking for pilots to fly in Saudi Arabia.
So he went for it, moving his wife and young son to the middle of nowhere in the Middle East, and meeting a wealthy Saudi businessman in the process. His name, Mohammed bin Laden.
He and I got along famously.
Mohammed was a poor man from Yemen who emigrated to Saudi Arabia and started a construction company that would make him a billionaire.
He had how many kids, and what was that like?
Well, he had 25 boys and 29 girls, and somewhere around 30 wives. I don't know the exact number.
One of those boys, decades later, we would all know, Osama. But in the 60s, Osama was just another one of the many bin Laden kids who Ralph had never even seen. Ralph turned down the offer to become Mohammed bin Laden's personal pilot, but not long after that, the man who took the job made a deadly mistake, and the pilot and Mohammed died in a crash. And Ralph would have to fly to the scene.
Team to crash a bin Laden Beechcraft.
Mohammed's death left his oldest son, Salam, to lead the family and its industry, and he stayed in touch with Ralph. And when Ralph was back living in San Antonio, Salam and his entourage stopped here and took them to dinner at El Haro restaurant on the north side. And that's where Salam invited Ralph and his wife back to Saudi Arabia.
He said, "How much do you make?" And I told him, and he says, "Well, I'll double it. I'll give you a house. I'll give you a car." And so I looked at my wife, and she says, "I'm packing."
So Ralph managed air shipments for the construction company and flew Salam to business meetings or vacations and was treated like family.
Well, he was just kind of a character.
They were friends, and even years later, when Ralph was back in Texas and when his son was getting married, Salam didn't miss it. But the weekend here ended in tragedy.
Next day he goes out after the wedding and he flies an ultralight and crashes and kills himself.
Another plane accident, another death. Ralph had still never met Osama and only saw him once.
And I was talking to Solomon, and he came walking by. And I said, "Who's that?" And he said, "Oh, that's Osama. He's going to pray. He's very religious."
Osama was disowned soon after that, and the September 11th attacks deepened the family break.
They said, "He doesn't belong to the family anymore." They ostracized him. They were through with him.
Still, even being associated with anything named Bin Laden can get that kind of reaction.
"You know the Bin Ladens?" "Yeah." "Well, how are they?" "Well, I just explained like I did to you. Hey, there was one bad apple. The rest of the family is good. I couldn't ask for, I worked for them, and they never forgot me." I said, "There was one bad one. Can't say anything. What else can you say?"
Again, I'd like to thank him for talking with us. He was understandably a little hesitant to talk about all of that just because of that name. But so many of our veterans, like him, have some interesting, fascinating stories to tell. So if you know somebody like that, let me know.